She arrived half-frozen, face bruised, throat bearing a man's fingerprints with 11 cents in her pocket and nowhere left to run. He came to town for flour. He never expected to find her. And she never expected that the man who sent for her as a legal shield would become the one person willing to stand in the dark with a loaded gun just to keep her safe. But before any of that could happen, she had one night to save a little girl's life, crack open 4 years of silence, and bring down the most powerful man in Silver Creek. This is the story of Maggie Calloway. If you believe that the most powerful stories are the ones told around a fire, stories of the Wild West, of love forged through hardship, of mothers who weren't born that way, but became one anyway, and of strangers who chose each other when the whole world walked away, then you're exactly where you belong. The most courageous thing a broken person can do is walk into someone else's storm and say, "I'm staying." If Maggie's story moved something in you, drop a below. Tell us what town you're watching from and share this with someone who needs to believe that starting over is always worth it. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. We'll be here waiting for you.
The stagecoach was 3 hours behind. That fact alone should have told Jesse Holbrook that something was mighty wrong. Nothing ever ran late in Silver Creek, Montana, not unless the weather turned sour or a body was found along the trail. He stood there on the porch of Perkins' General Store, collar turned up to cut the wind, and stared down the north road where that coach should have been hours before sunset. "You still waiting?" Dorothy Perkins asked, leaning out of her doorway with her arms crossed. "Jesse, that coach ain't showing up. The snow's piled too high past Dutchman's Ridge. You get inside before you freeze solid." "It'll come," Jesse said. Hayes never misses his Saturday run. Hayes is 62 years old, driving through a blizzard. Even stubbornness has its limits. Jesse didn't say another word. He just pulled his hat down lower and kept his eyes on that road. His boots were soaked plumb through. His fingers were aching something fierce inside his gloves. But he told the man he'd wait. And Jesse Holbrook was not a man to break his word to folks he made a deal with. It didn't matter if those folks were a mail-order bride agency clean out in St. Louis that had sent word his intended would be on the December 14th coach. He never really wanted to send for a bride in the first place. The whole idea felt wrong, kind of like pulling on another man's worn-in boots. But Lucy hadn't cracked a smile in 6 months. Ellie hadn't said more than 2 words together since Hannah passed on. And Caleb, just 8 years old and trying with all his might to be the man of the house, came to him last summer with worry in his eyes that no boy should have and said, "Pa, I reckon we need some help." That near broke Jesse's heart. It wasn't the words, but how careful his boy was when he said them, like he'd rehearsed it, like he was scared his pa might get mad. So Jesse wrote to that agency. Or, truth be told, he had Dorothy Perkins write for him, because his own handwriting looked like a chicken had stomped through an inkwell, and his spelling was even worse. Dorothy put together a fine letter describing a widowed rancher, 38 years of age, with 3 kids and 500 acres, looking for a woman of good character for marriage and to raise a family. The answers came back in a flood. Jesse had Dorothy read every last one of them. Most were too cheerful, too desperate, sounding more like they were selling something. But one of those letters was different. It was from a woman named Margaret Calloway, way out in Philadelphia. Her writing was small and tidy, and she chose her words with care. "I will not make myself out to be something I am not," she'd written. "I am 29 years old. I have no money and no family left that would have me. I can sew, keep the books, and nurse the sick. I have lived through things I'd rather not put in a letter. I'm not looking for a rescue. I'm looking for a place I can be of use and maybe, with time, a place to be safe. If that is a thing you can offer, I would be much obliged for the opportunity." Jesse made Dorothy read that letter to him 2 times over. Then he just said, "Her. Write back to her." That was 2 months ago. Letters had been going back and forth since, each one a little longer, a little more truthful than the last. Margaret, who said to call her Maggie, told him about her father's tailor shop, and how she learned to manage his ledgers. Jesse, with Dorothy as his pen, told her about the ranch, about Hannah's passing, and about the children who needed more than he could give them by himself. He didn't tell her about Wade Prescott. He didn't tell her about the trouble that was brewing. Some things just don't belong in a letter. So there he stood in the biting cold, waiting for a woman he'd never laid eyes on, wondering if he'd done a terrible, selfish thing by asking her to come into this life. Jesse. It was Dorothy's voice again, with a sharper edge to it now. There's something coming up the road. He saw it then. It wasn't a stagecoach. It was a figure moving through the thick snow. It was the wrong speed, the wrong size, moving way too low to the ground. Jesse stepped off the boardwalk, squinting his eyes against all that white. It was a person, walking, then stumbling, falling down and pulling themselves back up just to fall again. Jesse was off and running before he'd even finished the thought. His boots broke through the hard crust of snow with every step. He could hear Dorothy behind him yelling for Doc Shaw. He didn't slow his pace one bit. The figure finally collapsed, about 50 yards from the edge of town. When Jesse got to her, she was face down in a snowdrift. One of her hands was stretched out as if she'd been reaching for something. He fell to his knees beside her and gently turned her over. She was a small woman, maybe 5'4", and wearing a black dress that wouldn't offer more warmth against a Montana winter than a single page from a newspaper. She had no coat and no gloves. Her boots were city boots with thin soles that were split right open. Her dark, reddish-brown hair had come undone and was frozen in icy clumps to her face. But it was her face that made Jesse's breath catch in his throat. Her bottom lip was split wide open and swollen. A deep bruise covered her left cheek, a dark purple that was fading to yellow around the edges. It wasn't brand new, but it wasn't old neither. And right across her throat, just over her collar, were marks that looked for all the world like a man's fingerprints. Somebody had put their hands on this woman. Somebody had hit her in the face, and then she had walked through a blizzard just to get away from wherever that somebody was. "Ma'am," Jesse said, shrugging off his heavy coat and wrapping it around her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were green, like river stones, and they held a fear so deep it made Jesse's own chest ache. "Don't," she whispered out. "Please don't make me go back. Nobody's sending you anywhere. What's your name?" She tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering so hard she couldn't form the words. Jesse didn't push for an answer. He lifted her into his arms, and she weighed next to nothing, like a small bird that the wind could just carry off. He carried her back toward the general store, where Dorothy was already holding the door wide open next to a roaring fire. "Good Lord, have mercy," Dorothy whispered when she got a good look at the woman's face. "Put her here by the stove. I'll fetch some blankets." Jesse gently set her down in the chair closest to the heat. Her whole body was shaking in awful tremors that rattled her jaw and made her hands twitch in her lap. Dorothy wrapped her up in blankets and pressed a warm mug of coffee into her hands. "You drink this," Dorothy commanded. "Just little sips now. You're nearly frozen through." The woman did as she was told, flinching when the hot coffee touched her busted lip. Her eyes were darting all around the store like a trapped animal, taking note of every way out, judging every shadow. Jesse had seen that look before. He'd seen it in horses that had been mistreated, and in dogs that would cower if you so much as raised a hand. "My name is Jesse Holbrook," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "This here is Dorothy Perkins. You're in Silver Creek, Montana. You're safe with us now." At the name Holbrook, something in her eyes changed. First recognition, and then something much worse. It was shame. "Margaret Calloway," she said, her voice just a rasp, all scraped and raw like she'd been screaming. "I'm the woman you sent for." Jesse felt like the floor had just dropped out from under him. This was his mail-order bride. This broken, battered, half-dead woman was the one he'd invited into his house and into the lives of his children. "What in God's name happened to you?" he asked her. "The stagecoach," she began, but had to stop. She drew in a breath that seemed to cause her pain. "The stagecoach, It broke an axle back at Dutchman's Ridge. The driver, a Mr. Hayes, he went on to get some help. But there was another man on board, a passenger. He said he knew my name from the agency list. He said he'd paid for me first and that I belonged to him. Dorothy's face turned pale as a sheet. Who was he? He never said his name. A big fella with a red beard. He tried to pull me from the coach. When I fought back, She reached up and touched her throat. I got away. I ran into the woods and just walked all night. You walked 12 miles through a blizzard, Jessie said, and it wasn't a question. I didn't know how far it was, she replied. I just knew I couldn't afford to stop. Just then, Doc William Shaw came bustling in, breathing heavy, his doctor's bag slapping against his leg. He was a tall, skinny man with kind eyes and hands that always had a little tremor, right up until he went to work. Then they became steady as a rock. Let me have a look, he said, all business. He checked her face, her throat, her hands. Frostbite on 3 fingers, but it's minor. It should heal up fine. This bruise on your face is about 4, maybe 5 days old. Somebody hit you more than once. And these marks here on your throat, he said, looking straight at Jessie. Somebody tried to strangle her. I know, Jessie said in a low voice. There's more, Doc Shaw said, his voice dropping. She's malnourished. She hasn't been eating right for weeks, maybe even longer. And these injuries on her face, well, they weren't all from one time. Some were older, a sad history of bruises layered one on top of the other. This woman had been hurt again and again for a long while. Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes, but she held them back with sheer will. My husband, she explained. My late husband. He passed on 2 months ago. His brother took charge of the house after that. He was even meaner. A heavy silence fell over the room. You were running from your brother-in-law, Jessie stated more than asked. I answered your advertisement the very next day after my husband was buried. Your letters were the only hope I had to hold on to. When the money for my ticket arrived, I slipped out in the dead of night with nothing but my sewing kit and the clothes on my back. She glanced down at her tattered dress. I had 15 cents when I stepped on that train in Philadelphia. I have 11 cents left. Dorothy let out a low sound, a mix of pure anger and deep sorrow. You poor thing. Ooh. I am not a child, Maggie said, and there was a spine of steel in her voice even though she was trembling. And I am not poor. I am alive. I can work hard. I can earn my keep. All I need is a chance. Jessie just looked at her, this stranger he had welcomed into his world through carefully written letters and a hope that felt nearly impossible. He'd been expecting someone strong and sensible, maybe a little plain, but certainly not broken. He had not braced himself for the bruises, the fear, and a kind of bravery that made his own troubles seem mighty small. Miss Calloway, he began, I reckon I need to be straight with you. Her expression tensed up immediately. She was getting ready for him to turn her away. He saw it in the way she pulled her shoulders in, the way she held that coffee cup, like it was the only anchor she had in the world. I sent for you because my children are in need of a mother. That part is still true. But I am not going to marry you tomorrow, or next week, or on some timeline cooked up by an agency in St. Louis. You have been through a terrible ordeal and you need some time to mend. So this is what I am offering, and you can take it or you can leave it. He took a breath, picking his words with care. I have a spare room out at the ranch. It is not much, but it is warm and the door has a good lock. You can stay there, help out with the children, and do whatever work feels right. I will pay you $2 a week on top of your room and board. There are no other strings attached, no expectations. If, after a month or 2, you decide you want to stay and we get along, we can talk about marriage then. And if you decide this life is not for you, I will pay for your ticket to wherever you want to go. No questions will be asked. Maggie just stared at him. Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me. I know what I can see. I see a woman who walked 12 miles in a blizzard just to keep a man from laying his hands on her ever again. That tells me more about who you are than any letter ever could." "He is right," Dorothy said with conviction. "And if you would rather stay here in town, I have a room upstairs and could sure use some help in the store. Either way, you have a place here. Folks in Silver Creek do not turn their back on a woman who needs help." "Well, not everybody," Doc Shaw mumbled. And Jesse knew he was thinking of Wade Prescott, who would turn away his own mother if she could not pay. Maggie looked from one to the other, these strangers who were offering a kindness she surely did not expect. Her hands had finally stopped their shaking. Jesse could not tell if it was from the warmth of the fire or the warmth in their words. "Your children," she said, looking straight at Jesse. "Tell me about them." A tight knot in Jesse's chest seemed to loosen. She was not about to run. She was asking the important questions. "Lucy is 11. She has been trying to be the mama of the house since Hannah passed, and it is wearing her right down to the bone. She will be cautious of you, might even act hostile. Do not take it to heart. She is just terrified of losing somebody else. And the others? Caleb is 8. He is a good boy. Tries a little too hard to make everyone happy. He will probably fall in love with you in the first hour if you let him." "And Ellie?" Jesse's voice hitched just a bit. "Ellie is 6. She just stopped talking after her mother died. Not completely. She will whisper to Lucy now and then, or to the barn cat, but she has not said a full sentence to me in 4 years." Maggie's eyes went soft. 4 years. "The doc says there is nothing physically wrong with her. He says it is grief. He says she will talk when she is good and ready. But it has been 4 long years, and I am starting to wonder if ready is ever going to come." "I would like to meet them," Maggie said softly. "If that is all, write with you tomorrow. It is too late for tonight, and you need your rest. Dorothy, can she stay with you tonight? The room is already warming up." Dorothy said, "You go on home, Jesse. Check on your little ones. She will be here come morning." Jesse put on his hat and started to leave, but then he paused. "Miss Calloway, one last thing." "Yes?" "That fellow on the stagecoach, the one with the red beard, did he happen to say where he was headed?" "To Silver Creek. He said he had some business to attend to here." Jesse and Dorothy shared a worried look. "I will go have a word with Sheriff Pewitt," Jesse said. "You be sure to lock your door tonight." He stepped out into the biting cold, and the wind felt like it could push him over. The snow was coming down even harder now, thick and determined, making the whole world a swirl of white. Jesse pulled his collar up high and walked toward his wagon, where his horse stood, patient and miserable in the foul weather. He thought about Maggie Calloway, about the marks on her face and the prints on her throat, about how she had said, "I am alive," like it was some great victory, and he reckoned it was. He thought about Hannah, who had been so strong and full of laughter and life, and then, all of a sudden, she was not. Who had died in that back bedroom while a blizzard screamed outside and Jesse rode like a madman for a doctor who showed up too late? He thought about his children. Lucy, trying so hard to keep everything from falling apart. Caleb, pretending to be so brave. Ellie, locked away in her own silence like a little bird in a cage. And he thought about what Dorothy would say if she found out the real reason he had sent off for a mail-order bride. It was not just about being lonely, or that the children needed a mother, but because Wade Prescott had made it perfectly clear that a man without a wife was a man without any real standing in this town. And a man without standing was a man whose land could be swiped right out from under him. The law back in Montana Territory said a married man's homestead was safe from his creditors. An unmarried man's was fair game. And Wade Prescott held the papers on half the ranches in Silver Creek, including Jesse's. Papers that claimed Jesse owed money that he had already paid. Papers that were almost certainly fake, but looked real enough to trick a judge. Jesse needed a wife, plain and simple, to protect his land. And now his intended wife had shown up, beaten nearly to death, running from one violent man straight into a town run by another. He climbed up onto the wagon and snapped the reins. The horse dug in its hooves and they pulled out onto the road toward home. Behind him, in the window above Perkins's general store, a single lamp was burning, and Jesse Holbrook drove straight into the storm, carrying the heavy weight of everything he had not told Maggie Calloway, and wondering just how long he could keep it from her before the whole truth came crashing down on them both. At the ranch, he found Lucy waiting right by the door, her arms crossed, her face set with that special kind of anger a girl of 11 gets when she has been left in charge for too long. "You are late," she said. Ellie refused to eat her supper. Caleb broke a plate, and one of the barn cats had her kittens in your saddle. "I am sorry, Lucy girl. Did you get the flour?" Jesse realized with a sinking heart that he had left town without a single thing he went for. The store was already closed by the time I finished my business. "What kind of business takes all day in town?" Lucy's eyes narrowed. "Pa, did the stagecoach arrive?" Jesse hung his coat on the peg and sat down to wrestle off his wet boots. Lucy just stood there over him, waiting. She had Hannah's face, that same strong jaw and steady gaze that never missed a thing. "It did," he said, "and we will talk all about it in the morning. Pa, in the morning, Lucy." She stared at him for a good long moment, reading his face like she read the sky for weather, always looking for the storm hiding behind the calm. Then she just turned and walked back toward the kitchen without saying another word. Jesse found Caleb fast asleep on the rug in front of the fire, an old book lying open on his chest. The boy had been trying to teach himself to read from an old almanac, sounding out the words by the firelight every single night. Jesse lifted him up as gently as he could and carried him off to his bed. In the girls' room, Ellie was curled up on her side, her little arm wrapped tight around the rag doll Hannah had made for her just before she died. Even while she slept, the child's face was tensed up and watchful, like she was listening for a sound that never came. Jesse stood there in the doorway, just looking at his 3 children sleeping in this cold house on this dark night. And he made up his mind. Tomorrow he would bring Maggie Calloway out to this ranch. He would give her that spare room and the work and the wages he had promised her. He would let his children size her up and see what unfolded. And he was not about to mention Wade Prescott, not just yet. He wanted to give her time to catch her breath, to mend a little and decide for herself if this life was what she truly wanted. It felt selfish, and he knew it. But Jesse Holbrook had figured out a long time ago that just staying alive sometimes called for that kind of selfishness. The kind that makes you bring a stranger under your roof because you need her, even with the clear and present danger waiting just outside your door. The wind howled and threw itself against the window panes. The fire in the hearth popped and settled low. And somewhere out there in that big storm, the world kept on turning, not caring one bit about the small, desperate hopes of the folks just trying to make it through. Jesse was up and moving before the sun. He grained the horses, busted the ice in the water trough, and went to check on the cattle in the nearby pasture. 14 head had wandered south in the night, leaning on the fence line like they sensed something wicked was on its way. He pushed them back, working by himself in that gray morning light, his breath pluming in the air like smoke. By the time he stomped the snow off his boots and got back to the house, Lucy had breakfast laid out. There were eggs and salt pork, and coffee that was more water than anything since they were getting low on beans. Caleb was already in his chair, kicking his legs and chattering away. Pa, the barn cat, had 5 kittens, 5 of them. "Can I keep just one? Billy Dawson from church said his pa drowns kittens, but that is just plain wrong, is it not, Pa? You would not ever drown kittens. Nobody is drowning a single thing," Jesse said. He poured a cup of coffee and sat his tired self down. Lucy set a plate in front of him without saying a word. Ellie was in her own chair, eating with her eyes pointed down at her food, her little rag doll propped up right beside her plate like she was a guest for supper. "I have got to ride into town this morning," Jesse announced. "You just went to town yesterday," Lucy shot back. "And you came back without the flour. I know it. I will get it today." What is in town that is so important it cannot wait? Jesse put his fork down. He had been planning to ease into the subject, to find the right way to say it, but Lucy's eyes were already full of suspicion, and he knew that trying to dance around the truth with his oldest girl just made everything worse. There is a woman in town. Her name is Margaret Calloway. She has come a long way to help us out here on the ranch. I am bringing her home with me today. The kitchen fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even Caleb stopped his kicking. Help us how? Lucy asked. Her voice was as flat and cold as a frozen pond. With the house, the cooking, your lessons, all the things I'm not doing a good enough job with on my own. We are getting by just fine, Lucy. We are. I cook, I do the cleaning, I look after Ellie and Caleb. We do not need some strange woman coming in here and telling us all what to do. You are 11 years old, Jesse said, his voice gentle. You should not have to carry all that. You ought to be reading your books and playing with your friends and just being a little girl. I am not a little girl. Yes, you are. And I am sorry that I ever let you forget it. Lucy's jaw set hard. She looked so much like Hannah in that moment that it felt like Jesse's heart cracked right down the middle. Is she your mail-order bride? Lucy asked. The one you have been writing letters to? Jesse had not known that Lucy knew about those letters, but he should have figured. Lucy knew every single thing that went on in this house. She was supposed to be, but things took a different turn. She has been through some awful hard times, and right now all she needs is a safe roof over her head and some honest work. I have offered her the spare room and fair wages. That is all it is for now. For now, Lucy repeated. And what if I say I do not want her here? Jesse reached his hand across the table and took his daughter's. Then I would have to ask you to give her a chance anyway. Not for my sake, but for Ellie, and for Caleb, and for you. Even if you are not able to see it just yet. Lucy snatched her hand away and pushed herself up from the table. Fine. Bring her home, but she is not my mother. She stormed out of the kitchen, and a second later Jesse heard her bedroom door slam shut. Caleb stared at his father with wide, worried eyes. Is the lady nice, Pa? I believe so. Does she know how to make good biscuits? Lucy's biscuits are as hard as a rock, but you cannot tell her I said so. In spite of it all, Jesse nearly cracked a smile. I do not know a thing about her biscuits. I guess we will all find out together. He glanced over at Ellie. The little girl had not moved a muscle, had not even looked up, but her hand had found her rag doll and was squeezing it for dear life. Jesse wanted to say something to make her feel better, but he knew from experience that words just bounced right off of Ellie like pebbles off water. She was living in a quiet place he could not get to, and it was the thing that pained him more than anything else in this world. I will be back in a couple of hours, he said. Lucy is in charge. The ride to town took a whole lot longer than it usually did. A fresh layer of snow had fallen during the night, and the road was hidden under a foot of pure white. Jesse's horse picked its way forward with care, its ears pinned back against the bitter cold. The sky was the color of dirty gray wool, hanging low and heavy like it was promising more bad weather to come. Over at Perkins' General Store, Dorothy was waiting for him with a hot cup of coffee and a look on her face that said she had a few things on her mind. She barely slept a wink, Dorothy told him. I heard her pacing the floor half the night, and she was up and about before I was this morning, which is really saying something. I found her down in the store, reorganizing my whole display of ribbons. Said she just could not keep still. How is she doing? She is scared, and she is trying her best not to let it show. She asked me 3 different times if you were truly coming back for her. Dorothy stopped for a moment. Jesse, that girl has been hurt in ways she has not even told us about yet. You need to be gentle with her. That is my intention. And you need to be honest with her. Do not go dragging her into this whole mess with Wade Prescott without telling her exactly what she is walking into. I will tell her when the time is right. The time is right now. Dorothy, do not you start with me. Do not you Dorothy me, Jesse Holbrook. That woman has a right to know the truth, and she will get it. But for today, she deserves a warm room and a hot meal that is not given out of pity. Just let me give her that much first. Dorothy huffed, but she let the matter drop. She called up the stairs, and Maggie came on down. Jessie almost did not recognize her. Dorothy had lent her a decent wool dress, a dark blue one, and a heavy shawl. Her hair was all washed and pinned up neatly, but the bruises were still plain to see. And the way she held herself, with her shoulders all drawn in, and her eyes scanning the room before she stepped inside, that much was the same. "Mr. Holbrook," she said. Her voice had more strength to it today, but it was still measured, like she was afraid of wasting her words. "Miss Calloway, are you ready to go?" "I have been ready since 5 o'clock this morning." "She is not pulling your leg," Dorothy added. "Get her out of my hair before she organizes my entire stockroom by color." Jessie lifted Maggie's one and only bag, a beat-up carpet satchel that felt like it was full of air, and set it in the wagon. He gave her a hand up to the seat, and she pulled back the instant his fingers touched her arm. It was just a tiny thing, a slight recoil, but Jessie saw it and tucked that knowledge away. "It is about an hour's ride," he told her, settling in beside her. "The roads are rough from the snow. I walked 12 miles through worse. I reckon I can handle a wagon ride." They traveled without talking for a good while. Jessie was not the kind of man to fill a silence just to hear himself talk, and Maggie seemed to appreciate it. She sat bolt upright on the bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the country roll by with a look Jessie could not decipher. "Your children," she finally said. "You mentioned them yesterday, but I would like to hear more. What is something I should know that you would not write in a letter?" Jessie considered that for a moment. "Lucy will try her best to run you off. Do not let her. She does not want me there. She does not want anyone there who is not her mother. It is not about you, personally. It sure feels personal when you are the one she's trying to get rid of." "I imagine it does. But Lucy has been holding this family together on her own for 4 years. She is worried that if someone else steps in, it will make those 4 years of her life meaningless, that she was not important." Maggie sat with that for a spell. "I understand that feeling. I figured you might. And Ellie, you said she does not talk. Not to me, not to hardly anyone. She will sometimes whisper to Lucy or have a chat with the animals. Doc Shaw says there's not a thing wrong with her physically. He says it is just her way of keeping herself from being hurt again. Losing her mother at 2 years old, she likely has no memory of her. She does not, but she can feel that something is gone. You can see it clear as day on her face. A kind of emptiness, like a house with no one living in it. She knows something ought to be there, but she does not know what it is." A shimmer of tears appeared in Maggie's eyes. She turned her head to look at the white rolling hills and was quiet for several long minutes. "I ought to tell you something," she said finally, "before I lay eyes on your children, so you have a chance to change your mind if you're so inclined." "Go on." "My husband, Virgil Creed, did more than just drink and raise his hand to me. He was a trickster, a swindler. He conned folks out of their savings and used our family name to get away with it. When he passed, his brother Emmett took his place. And Emmett was worse because Emmett was clever. He spread the word all over Philadelphia that I was Virgil's partner in his schemes, that I helped him plan everything, that I was just as much to blame as my dead husband." "Were you?" "No. But Emmett had documents, fakes, I suspect, but they looked real enough. He took them to the law. They showed up at my house. I left before they could put me in cuffs." Jessie kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "So there could be people searching for you?" "There might be. I cannot say for sure. Emmett has a lot of influence, but Montana is a far piece from Philadelphia. I am praying it is far enough." "And what if it is not?" Maggie turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his. "Then I will disappear. I will not bring any trouble down on your family, Mr. Holbrook. I give you my word. The very second my past becomes a danger to your children, I will be gone." Jessie reined the wagon to a halt. The horse huffed and pawed at the ground, anxious to get moving in the cold, but Jessie needed a minute. Miss Calloway, I am going to tell you something, and I need you to listen real close. I am listening. Every soul in Silver Creek has a past. I have got mine. Dorothy has got hers. Even Pastor Webb has a few secrets he reckons nobody knows. What counts out here is not where you came from. It is what you do while you are here. So unless you're about to tell me you actually helped cheat those people, which I do not believe for a second, your past is your own concern. And if trouble does come calling, we will face it together. Maggie just stared at him. Her eyes were shining with an emotion she was fighting hard to keep down. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "I know you walked 12 miles through a blizzard to get here. I know you flinch when a man touches your arm, but you do not shy away from a hard conversation. I know you straightened up Dorothy's ribbon rack at 5 in the morning because doing nothing scares you more than a blizzard. That is enough to know for now." He flicked the reins, and the wagon jolted into motion. Next to him, Maggie covered her mouth with her hand and looked away. And Jessie made a point not to see that she was crying. Some things a person has a right to do in private, even when you are sitting 3 feet away from them on a wagon seat. The ranch appeared in the distance 20 minutes later. Maggie wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. And right before his eyes, she transformed into someone calm and prepared. He found himself wondering how many times she had done that in her life. Pulled herself back together from one second to the next, hiding all her hurt behind a steady gaze. Caleb was out on the porch waiting. He had obviously been on the lookout for them because the second the wagon came into sight, he shot up and began waving with both of his arms. "That is Caleb," Jessie said. "He favors you." "Poor child," Maggie laughed. The sound was small and startled, as if she had not expected to find a reason to laugh today. That little sound did something to Jessie's insides that he was not ready to think about. Caleb ran out to the wagon before it even stopped. "You are the lady. Pa said you were coming. Do you know how to make biscuits? Can you ride a horse? Do you like cats? We have got 6 cats now because the barn cat had kittens, and Pa said nobody is drowning anything." "Caleb," Jessie said, "take a breath." "I certainly do know how to make biscuits," Maggie told the boy, her voice full of warmth. "I cannot ride a horse just yet, but I am ready to learn. And I adore cats." "She is perfect," Caleb announced, grabbing her hand to pull her toward the house. Inside, Lucy stood by the stove, her arms folded tight across her chest. She had put on her Sunday dress, a move Jessie knew was purely defensive. Lucy put on her armor when she felt a threat. "Lucy, this is Miss Calloway." "Hello, Lucy," Maggie said. "Your father has told me so much about you. He says you have been looking after this whole family. And I can tell he was not exaggerating one bit. This kitchen is cleaner than any I have ever seen." Lucy's hard expression did not budge. "The spare room is through there. It is small. I am sure it will be just fine. Supper is at 6. I do the cooking. Then I will help with the cleaning. I do not need any help." "I am sure you do not, but more hands always make for lighter work." Lucy looked at Maggie for a long, hard moment, sizing her up, searching for a weakness. Then she turned her back and went back to the stove. "Ellie is in the bedroom. She will not come out for strangers." "That is perfectly all right," Maggie replied. "I am in no hurry." Jessie led Maggie to the spare room. It was tiny, with just enough space for a small bed and a wooden chair, but it was warm and spotless. Someone, likely Lucy, had left a folded quilt at the foot of the bed. "It is not much," Jessie began to say. "It is mine," Maggie said, "and that makes it more than enough." She began to unpack her bag. Jessie watched from the doorway as she set out her belongings. 2 dresses, both black and worn nearly through. A sewing kit in a leather pouch, clearly well used, its needles shiny and sharp, a Bible with a broken spine, and a small photograph on tin of a woman who had Maggie's eyes. "My mother," Maggie explained, noticing his glance. "She passed on when I was 17. This is the only thing I have left of her." "I'm sorry to hear that. She was a dressmaker, the finest in all of Philadelphia. Folks used to say she could see a dress in a shop window and sew it from memory." Even better than the first one. She taught me everything I know. Maggie gently touched the sewing kit. This was hers. Jesse gave a slow nod. He knew about the weight of tools passed down, the way they seemed to carry the departed right along into the world of the living. Hannah's gardening tools still hung on a peg in the barn, right where she left them the day she died. He could not bring himself to use them, but he could not take them down either. "I will let you get settled," he said. "If you need anything, just give a holler." Uh-huh. He found Caleb in the kitchen, nearly buzzing out of his skin with excitement. "She is nice, Pa. I told you we needed some help. Can she stay with us forever?" "We will see, son." "But you like her, do you not? She seems nice and she knows about biscuits." "Biscuits are not everything, Caleb." "They are a lot of things, though." Jesse headed out to the barn to check on a mare about to foal and to give everyone inside some room to breathe. When he returned an hour later, the house smelled different. Not a bad different, just not the same. Maggie had discovered the herbs Teresa had left behind in the kitchen and was now making soup. Real soup, with vegetables and spices, and something that smelled good enough to eat. Caleb was perched at the table, talking a mile a minute to Maggie as she cooked. She listened and nodded and asked him questions, and the boy just lit up under her attention like a wildflower after a spring rain. Lucy was nowhere to be found, but as Jesse walked past the girls' room, he heard his oldest daughter's voice, quiet and angry, talking to someone. "She is not staying. She cannot stay. Pa does not really want her here. He is just being polite because she is hurt. As soon as she is better, she will leave. They all leave." And then, so soft, Jesse almost did not catch it, came another voice. It was hardly a whisper, just a puff of air. "She smells nice." Jesse stopped dead in his tracks. That was Ellie. Ellie had spoken, not to him, not in a way he could answer, but she had said words on her own for the first time in weeks. 2 simple words about Maggie. He stood there in the hall with his hand braced against the wall and felt something that had been locked up tight inside his chest for 4 years finally break loose. It was a feeling so sharp and unfamiliar it was almost scary. It felt like hope. At supper, they all sat around the table as a family for the first time in a long time. Lucy served the meal because she was determined to. Maggie ate slowly as if she was tasting every single bite, like a person who had known true hunger not long ago. Caleb chattered on enough for all of them. Ellie sat in her usual place, quiet as a mouse, with her rag doll on her lap, but her eyes kept flicking over to Maggie, shifting to look at Maggie, watching her with a quiet focus that Jesse knew all too well. It was the same way Ellie watched the barn cats, full of curiosity and caution, wanting to move closer but scared of what might happen if she did. After supper, Maggie offered to wash the dishes. Lucy told her she would do it herself. Maggie just said fine and asked if she could look over the ranch accounts instead. "I saw a box of papers in the front room," she said, looking at Jesse. "Would you mind if I started trying to make sense of them?" "Go right ahead, but I have to warn you it is a real mess. I like messes. They keep my hands from being idle." She sat right down at the table with that box full of receipts and invoices and got to work, sorting papers into neat little piles with quick, certain movements. Jesse watched her from his chair across the room, pretending to read an old almanac Caleb had left behind. Lucy came out of the kitchen and saw Maggie working, and she just stood there for a second with the dish towel still clutched in her hands. Something moved across her face. Something complicated and young that was not quite anger. "What are you doing with my pa's papers?" she demanded. "I am putting them in order. Your father has been paying way too much for his feed. I want to find out just how much and for how long. How do you know he is paying too much?" "Because I looked at the prices they have listed in the general store catalog and I compared them to what is on these here invoices. The difference is considerable." Lucy moved a little closer, in spite of herself. "How considerable?" "Enough to buy a brand new winter coat for every single person in this house. Maybe even 2 of them." Lucy looked down at the mess of papers and then she looked up at Maggie. Something in her expression shifted. It was not acceptance, not yet, but it was the first little crack in that high wall she had built. "I could use a new coat," Lucy said, her voice soft. "My old one does not fit me anymore." "Well then, we will just have to make sure your father stops getting cheated so we can maybe fix that for you." Lucy stood there for another moment. Then she turned around and went to her room. But she did not slam the door this time. She closed it gently, almost like she was leaving it open, just a tiny crack. Jessie put down the almanac. Maggie looked up from all the papers, and their eyes met from across the room. Not a word was spoken. Not a word was needed. The oil lamp flickered there between them, throwing long shadows up on the walls. Outside, the wind pushed hard against the house like it was a living creature. And inside, for the very first time in 4 long years, the silence felt less like an empty space, and more like the quiet moment right before something new is about to begin. Maggie had been at the ranch for 9 days when she finally heard Ellie laugh. She was sitting in the spare room, mending one of Caleb's shirts where the sleeve had ripped right at the shoulder. That boy went through his clothes like a wildfire tearing through dry brush, and Lucy had been patching his things up with scraps from old flour sacks that never matched and never held. Maggie had just taken over the mending without asking, and Lucy had let her do it without a single argument, which was about as close to getting permission as Maggie figured she was going to get. A little chuckle came from the front room. It was small and quick, gone almost before Maggie even noticed it. But she knew that sound did not come from Caleb, who laughed big and often, or from Lucy, who had not laughed even once since Maggie got here. She put down the shirt and walked over to the doorway. Ellie was sitting on the floor with one of the barn kittens, a little gray tabby that had slipped out of the barn and found its way inside through a crack under the kitchen door. The kitten was chasing its own tail, spinning around in tight circles, and Ellie was watching with her hand over her mouth like she was trying to trap the laughter inside. But a little bit had escaped anyway, just for a second. And now she just sat there, looking surprised by her own happiness. Maggie did not move a muscle, did not say a word. She had learned in 9 days that getting close to Ellie was like trying to sneak up on a deer. Any sudden move, any straight-on look, and that child would disappear back into her quiet place, like a rabbit diving into its hole. The kitten tumbled over and landed right on its back. Ellie made another sound, not quite a laugh this time, but mighty close. Her fingers reached out and touched the kitten's belly as light as a whisper, and the kitten grabbed her hand with all 4 of its paws and started gnawing on her thumb. Maggie stepped back from the doorway real slow and went back to her mending. She did not bring it up to Jesse when he came in for supper. Some things are just too fragile to be talked about. You have to let them grow on their own. That night, after the children were tucked in bed, Jesse brought her a cup of coffee and sat down at the table across from her. While she was working on the books, "You found something else," he said. It was not a question. He had learned to read her by the set of her shoulders when the numbers were making her angry. "Your property tax assessment from last year is all wrong," Maggie said. "Somebody valued your north pasture at 3 times what it is truly worth. That is why your tax bill shot up so high." "I had a feeling about that, just figured it was the county raising the rates." "It is not the county. It is the assessor. Who does your assessments?" Jesse's whole face changed. "Orrin Flagg. He works out of the county office in Helena. And who does Orrin Flagg drink with every Saturday night down at the saloon?" Jesse was quiet for a spell. "Wade Prescott. Your tax bill last year was $112 more than it should have been. The year before that, it was $87 more. Wade Prescott has been bleeding you dry through the tax office, Jesse. Slow enough so you would not notice, but fast enough to keep you struggling." Jesse pressed his hands down flat on the table. Maggie watched his knuckles turn white. She had seen this kind of anger before, the quiet kind. The kind that did not explode but just burned hot and steady, like coals buried under ash. "How much in total?" he asked. "Over 3 years, it is roughly $300. That is money I could have used to fix the barn roof. Money I could have used to buy Lucy a decent winter coat instead of letting her freeze in one that is 2 sizes too small." "I know. Do you think you can prove it?" "I can prove the assessment is just plain wrong. I can pull up what similar land in the county is valued at, and show them how off it is. Now, whether that is enough to prove Flagg did it on purpose, I do not know. But it is enough to demand they do it over and give you your money back." Jessie looked at her from across the table. The lamplight fell on the bruise on her cheek. Still fading, but still there. A reminder of everything she had been through to get here. "You have saved me more in 9 days than most men earn in a whole year," he said. "I have just looked at the numbers. The numbers were always right there. But nobody else ever bothered to look." Maggie did not say anything to that. She finished her coffee and went back to the ledgers. And Jessie just sat there watching her with a look on his face he probably thought she could not see. But she could. She had been watching people's faces her entire life. That is how you survive when you live with a dangerous man. You learn to read every little twitch, every change, every clenching of the jaw. What she saw in Jessie's face was not danger. It was thankfulness, turning into something deeper. Something he was not ready to put a name on. She was not ready either. But she felt it, sitting between them like a third person at the table, just patient and waiting. 2 days later, the real storm finally came. Jessie had been watching the sky all morning, reading the clouds, the same way Maggie read numbers. "A big one is coming," he told Buck Morrison, his foreman, who had ridden over from his cabin on the South Ridge. "Get the cattle into the sheltered draw. Move the horses into the barn. I figure we have about 4 hours." Buck, a quiet man of 50 who had worked for Jessie since before Hannah's passing, just nodded and rode off. For the next 3 hours, Jessie hauled firewood, battened down the shutters, and filled every last bucket with water from the well. If this storm was as mean as he suspected, they might be snowed in for a good long while. Maggie pitched in without a word. She shifted the food supplies to the warmest spot in the kitchen, plugged the cracks under the doors with old rags, and checked that they had enough blankets and candles to see them through a week. She moved with a calm efficiency, like a woman who had seen trouble before. "You've been through this kind of thing," Jessie remarked, watching her pack a rag tightly into a window frame. "Philadelphia gets some hard winters, too. My mother and I survived the blizzard of '78. We were stuck inside for 3 days with no heat. She taught me that being prepared is what separates surviving from suffering." By afternoon, the storm made its arrival. The wind hit first, a howling beast that shook the very foundations of the house. Then the snow started, coming down so thick and fast the barn vanished behind a curtain of white in just minutes. The temperature dropped like a heavy stone kicked off a canyon ledge. They all gathered in the kitchen, the warmest room in the house. Jessie kept feeding the fire until it was a roaring comfort. Caleb had his face pressed against the window pane, watching the blizzard with the kind of fearless wonder only a boy has. Lucy sat in her chair, knitting with a look of grim resolve. Ellie was down on the floor playing with her rag doll and the little gray kitten that had taken to following her everywhere. Maggie put a soup on to cook with what little they had. There were potatoes, some salt pork, dried beans, and the last of the carrots from the root cellar. She tossed in some herbs that made the whole kitchen smell like a place a person would want to come home to, and even Lucy took a second helping without a single complaint. The storm howled on through the whole night. Jessie stayed awake to feed the fire, check on the windows, and listen as the wind clawed at every weak spot in the old house. Maggie kept him company. They sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, not saying much of anything, but the quiet between them had grown into something easy, a shared stillness that had no need for words. It was around midnight when Maggie heard it, a cough coming from the girls' room. It was a small sound, but it was wet and just plain wrong. She crept to the door and listened intently. Another cough came, followed by a wheezing sound that sent a chill straight through her. She eased the door open and saw Ellie sitting straight up in her bed. The little girl's face was flushed red, and her breathing was shallow and full of effort. The child's skin was scorching hot to the touch. "Jessie." He was by her side in 3 quick strides. He took one look at Ellie, and the color drained from his face right under his tan. No, he breathed. Not this again. Get me some cold water and clean cloths, and do it now. Jessie scrambled to obey. Maggie lifted Ellie out of the bed, and the little girl felt as limp and hot as a branding iron. Her breathing had a distinct rattle to it that Maggie knew all too well, a sound she had heard before. It was a sound that meant the sickness had taken hold in the lungs. "Lucy," Maggie called out, "I need you to wake up. I need your help." Lucy stumbled to the doorway, saw her sister, and her face went completely pale. "What is wrong with her?" "She has a fever and she is struggling to breathe. I need you to make sure the fire in the kitchen stays roaring hot. Do you think you can do that for me?" "Is she going to die?" Lucy's voice broke on that last word. All of her tough exterior, all the walls she built up so carefully, just fell away in that moment, and she was nothing more than a scared 11-year-old girl staring at her little sister. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Maggie answered firmly. "Go tend to that fire now." Lucy bolted from the room. Jessie returned with a basin of water and some cloths, and Maggie got right to work. She gently removed Ellie's nightgown and began wrapping her in cool, damp cloths to try and bring the fever down. The little girl whimpered softly, but did not fight, and that scared Maggie more than any struggle would have. "We need to get Doc Shaw," Jessie said. His voice was level, but she could see his hands were trembling. "You could never ride in this storm. You would freeze to death before you even made it to town." "I cannot just stand here and watch her fade away." "You are not going to just watch her. You are going to help me save her. Jessie, you need to look at me." He did, and his eyes were wild with a fear that Maggie knew all too well. He was right back in that room 4 years ago, watching Hannah slip through his fingers, feeling helpless, useless, unable to stop the thing that was stealing the person he loved most. "This is not the same thing," Maggie said with conviction. "Ellie is not Hannah. I am not going to let her die, but I need you here with me, and I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" Jessie took a deep breath, and then another one. The panicked look in his eyes began to fade, and something harder took its place: determination. "Just tell me what you need me to do." "I need my sewing kit from the spare bedroom. It is in a leather roll. Inside that roll there is a little cloth pouch filled with dried herbs. They were my grandmother's remedies. And I'm going to need some hot water, as hot as you can make it." Jessie went and fetched everything she asked for. Maggie untied the herb pouch and started sorting through the dried plants, the names of each one coming back to her in her mother's voice, in her grandmother's voice. She remembered generations of women who healed their families with what the good earth provided when a doctor was too far or cost too much. She made a poultice first, mixing mustard seed and dried thyme with hot water to form a paste. She spread it on a clean cloth and laid it gently across Ellie's tiny chest. The little girl flinched from the heat, but she did not cry out. Her eyes were open now, glassy and unfocused from the fever, just staring at nothing. "Ellie," Maggie whispered gently, "can you hear my voice? I need you to take the deepest breath you can. I know that it hurts, darling, but you have to try for me." Ellie's eyes slowly found Maggie's face. A small flicker of something passed through them. Maybe it was recognition or trust, or maybe just the simple absence of fear. She took a breath. It was weak and rattling and wet, but it was a little deeper than before. "That is a good girl. Again now." Maggie then brewed a tea from willow bark and elderberry, just the way her grandmother had shown her. Getting Ellie to drink it was the hardest part. The poor child gagged on the bitter taste, and more than half of it came right back up. But Maggie was patient, spooning tiny little sips past Ellie's chapped lips, waiting, and then spooning some more. Caleb appeared in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Is Ellie sick?" "She has a bit of a fever," Maggie told him. "She's going to be just fine, but she needs it to be quiet. Can you be a brave boy for me and go on back to bed?" "I want to stay here." "I know you do, honey. But the very best thing you can do for your sister right now is get your rest so you can help take care of her in the morning. Can you do that for me?" Caleb gave a solemn nod and went back to his room. Jesse saw the whole exchange with a feeling that was close to awe. He had never learned how to speak to his own children about being afraid. He just gritted his teeth and pushed through it, and expected them to do the same. Maggie, on the other hand, she gave the fear a name. She acknowledged it, and then she gave them a job to do about it. It was a whole different kind of strength from his, and he was just starting to realize how badly he needed it. The hours dragged on. Ellie's fever kept climbing higher in spite of the poultice, in spite of the tea, in spite of everything Maggie was trying. By 2 in the morning, the child was lost in delirium, her small body burning like a furnace, her breath coming in short, desperate little gasps. Lucy sat huddled in a corner of the kitchen with her knees pulled up to her chest, tears running in silent streams down her cheeks. She had given up trying to be strong. She was just a little girl watching her sister slip away. And the sheer terror in her eyes was the most raw and painful thing Jesse had ever witnessed. "She is not getting any better," Jesse said. His voice was flat and hollow. It was the voice of a man who is bracing for the absolute worst. Maggie refused to give up. She changed out the poultice, brewed an even stronger tea, and sponged Ellie's burning skin with cold water until her own hands were numb from the cold. She talked to the child the whole time. Maggie kept on talking, just a soft, steady stream of words. They didn't really matter. It was the sound of them that counted. Like a heartbeat in the dark. Something to hold on to. "My mama used to sing to me when I was poorly," Maggie whispered, laying a cool rag on little Ellie's forehead. She didn't have a voice like a bird, but it was warm, like a quilt wrapped around you. She'd sing about wide rivers and green hills, places she'd never laid eyes on. I'd just listen, and the fever didn't feel quite so scary. Maggie didn't sing, but she kept right on talking, telling Ellie about her mama's sewing shop back home, about the dresses they stitched, and how the afternoon sunlight would hit that shop window and turn everything to gold. Just simple, everyday memories of a life that was gone. She wasn't talking because Ellie understood, but because a steady, calm woman's voice is medicine no doctor can bottle. At 3 in the morning, Ellie's breathing changed. Maggie felt it deep in her bones before she heard it. A loosening up, a bit deeper. The rattle was still there, but it was fading, like a thunderstorm moving on to the next county. "Her skin feels cooler," Jesse said. He had his hand on Ellie's head, his voice shaking with the disbelief of a man who'd been waiting for a funeral and found a miracle instead. Maggie checked the little girl's pulse. It was stronger. "The fever's breaking," she said. "Thank the Lord it's breaking." Lucy let out a sound from the corner, a sob she'd been holding in for hours, finally letting go. Lucy scrambled across the floor, grabbed her sister's hand, and pressed it against her wet cheek. "Don't you ever do that to me again," Lucy whispered, hard and fierce. "Don't you ever scare me like that." Ellie's eyes fluttered open. No more glassy look, just clear eyes. She looked at Lucy, then Jesse, then finally settled on Maggie, who was kneeling there with dark circles under her eyes and stained hands, looking completely worn out. "You stayed," Ellie whispered. Just those 2 words, not to her sister or her daddy, but to Maggie. It was the first time that girl had spoken to anyone outside her kin in 4 years. Maggie's eyes welled up. She took Ellie's tiny hand. "Of course I stayed, sugar. Mama died, she went away, and she didn't come back." Jesse made a choked-up sound, turning his face away and covering his mouth with a fist, his shoulders shaking. 4 years. 4 years of silence. That was the heavy burden his little girl had been carrying around. "Your mama didn't want to leave," Maggie said, soft-like. "She got sick just like you did tonight. But she didn't have anyone around to fix her a remedy. If she had, she would have stayed. Mamas don't just leave their babies on purpose." "Promise?" "I promise. Are you going to leave too?" Maggie looked at this quiet, hurting 6-year-old who'd just handed her more trust than any grown-up had in years. She made a promise she had no right to make, one that might just break her heart later. but she meant it with everything she had. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." Ellie's fingers gave Maggie's hand a little squeeze. Then she closed her eyes and drifted off. Real sleep, deep and peaceful. The kind of sleep a kid gets when they finally feel safe. Lucy was staring at Maggie, not with anger anymore, but with something she was too young to name. "She talked to you," Lucy said, sounding stunned. "She actually talked to you." "She was ready," Maggie said. "She just needed to know she was safe." Lucy opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Thank you," she said, and it sounded like the words hurt to get out. "You don't owe me no thanks, Lucy." "Yes, I do. I've been awful to you, and you stayed anyway. You saved my sister. You saved—" Lucy's walls finally came tumbling down. She started crying, the way kids do when they've been holding it together for way too long. "I'm just so tired of being scared. I'm so tired of having to handle everything. I just want somebody to take care of me. For once." Maggie opened her arms, and Lucy fell into them like a house falling down. The girls sobbed against Maggie's chest, and Maggie held her tight, rocking her the way she imagined Hannah would have done. "You've been so brave," Maggie whispered into her hair. "Incredibly brave. But you don't have to carry that weight alone anymore. I'm here now." Jesse stood in the doorway, watching his daughters in the arms of a woman he'd only known for 9 days. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't bother hiding them. He'd spent 4 long years trying to glue his family together with hard work and stubborn silence. And this woman, this battered, bruised, but incredible woman, had done in 9 days what he hadn't managed in 4 years. She'd reached his children. She'd broken down those walls of grief and fear he hadn't even realized were standing. When Lucy finally cried herself to sleep in the chair, Maggie covered her up and walked into the kitchen. Jesse was sitting at the table, head in his hands. "She's going to be fine," Maggie said. "Both of them." Jesse looked up. He looked completely stripped bare. "I couldn't save Hannah," he admitted. "She passed away in that room while the snow was piling up. And I was useless. I rode out for the doctor, but he was too late. And she died all alone because I wasn't there. I was out in the blizzard hunting for help that never came." Maggie pulled up a chair across from him. "She knew you were trying, Jesse. It wasn't enough. It was a blizzard and a fever, and I couldn't control either one. I dragged her out here. Moving to Montana was my idea. She wanted to stay in Missouri near her kin, near the doctors. But I wanted land. I wanted to build something of my own. She came because she loved me, and it cost her her life. You didn't kill her, Jesse. The fever did. If you'd been in Missouri, you don't know that things would have turned out different. People die of scarlet fever in Missouri, too. They die of it in Philadelphia, New York, everywhere. You can't outrun sickness just by changing your zip code." Jesse was quiet for a long while. The fire popped and hissed. The wind howled against the side of the house. Somewhere down the hall, one of the kids shifted in their sleep. "You sound just like her," he said soft-like. "Hannah always used to say that worrying about things you can't fix is just borrowing trouble from tomorrow." Smart woman. She was. The smartest person I ever knew. He paused. "Until I met you." Maggie shook her head. "I ain't smart. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. Call it what you want. You saved my daughter's life tonight. You made Ellie talk. You made Lucy cry. And I mean that as the highest compliment I know. She hasn't cried since her mama's funeral," he added. "She's been carrying 4 years of grief inside her like a heavy stone. And you cracked it wide open in one night." They were ready, Jesse. They just needed someone to show them it was safe to let go. And you showed them. "I tried." Jesse reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, and steady. Maggie flinched at first, an old reflex, but then she didn't pull away. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I should have told you before you came to this ranch. About Wade Prescott. Jesse's eyes went wide. How did you know about him? Because I've been going through your ledgers for 9 days, Maggie said. Wade Prescott's name is all over the problems I found. The inflated feed prices came through a supplier tied to him. The tax assessment was done by his lackey at the county office. And 3 years ago, you took a loan from the Silver Creek Bank, which happens to be owned by Prescott. A loan with terms designed to bleed you dry until you have no choice but to default. Am I wrong? Jesse just stared at her. You figured all that out from the books? Numbers tell stories, Jesse. You just have to know how to read 'em. Wade Prescott has been trying to take your ranch for years. He's doing it slow, through the money, through the system, through people he owns. And if I had to guess, I'd say you didn't send for a mail-order bride just because your kids needed a mama. It's because Montana law protects a married man's homestead from creditors, and you needed a wife to keep Prescott from snatching your land. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Maggie had ever heard. Yes, Jesse said finally. That's part of it. Is it most of it? It was. Back when I wrote that first letter, I was looking for a legal shield, not a person. I'm ashamed of that now. You should be. I know. You should have told me. I know that too. Maggie pulled her hand away, not out of anger, but something close to it. I came here running from a man who used me. A man who married me for what I could do for him, and never once gave a lick about who I was inside. If that's what this is, it isn't, Jesse said, his voice raw. It started that way. I'll own up to that. But it ain't like that anymore. Not after tonight. Not after watching you save my daughter and break through to Ellie and hold Lucy while she cried. Maggie, I haven't felt a thing for anyone in 4 years. I thought that part of me died with Hannah, but it didn't. It was just frozen. You're thawing it out, and it scares the life out of me because I don't feel like I deserve it. Maggie studied him for a long time. She saw a man who'd made a selfish mistake and owned it. A man telling her the truth, even though he knew it might send her packing. A man afraid not of the storm outside, but of the one inside himself. Virgil had never given her the truth about anything. Not once in 6 years of marriage had he shown her the respect of being honest. And here was Jesse Holbrook, handing her the worst thing about himself and let her be the one to figure that out. And don't you ever lie to me again, she told him, not about anything. I am through with men who tell lies. I am not some fragile thing who needs you to decide what I can and cannot handle. If there is trouble coming down the road, I want to see it coming. I cannot keep this family safe if I am walking around in the dark. You are right about that. And Jesse, she added, yes. The next time you are in a bind, you ask for help straight. Do not try to pretty it up into something else. I would much rather you need me for who I really am than want me for a story you made up. Jesse gave a slow nod. In that moment, something settled right between them. It was not the fluttery feeling of romance, but something more like a solid foundation, something firm and level, built to last. Wade Prescott holds the note on this ranch, Maggie said, her voice all business again. I have looked over these loan papers, and they are nothing short of predatory. But the man is also careless. He has made mistakes in his interest figuring, and the payment records do not add up. If he is pulling the same tricks on you that he is with the tax office and the feed store, then this loan of his might not be worth the paper it is written on. You reckon you can beat him? I reckon I can uncover the truth. And from what I have seen in my life, the truth is the most powerful weapon a person can have. Men like Wade Prescott build their little empires on a bed of lies and confusion. You pull that out from under them, and they come tumbling down with nothing left. Jesse just stared at the woman across the table from him, her face bruised but her eyes burning with a fierce light. And he realized a plain fact. Margaret Calloway was the most extraordinary woman he had ever laid eyes on. Then you find it, he said. Whatever you need, whatever it takes, you find that truth. Maggie gave one firm nod and pulled the box of files closer. Outside, the blizzard howled on, blanketing Silver Creek under a good foot of fresh snow. But inside, a 6-year-old girl was sleeping soundly for the first time in 4 long years. An 11-year-old girl was asleep with the faint tracks of tears still on her face, and an 8-year-old boy was dreaming about warm biscuits and little kittens, and about the kind lady who had come to live with them. And there at the kitchen table, with only a single lamp pushing back the darkness, Maggie Calloway started the long work of saving Jesse Holbrook's ranch. She was not doing it because he had asked her to, and not because she felt she owed him a thing. She was doing it because this was her home now, too, and she would defend it with everything she had. Maggie worked straight through the rest of the night and all through the following day. She laid Jesse's papers out across the kitchen table, and when that was full, she moved to the floor and then into the main room, piecing together a story that had taken 7 years to unfold. By the time the storm finally gave up on the second morning, she had her answer. "He started this right after Hannah died," she told Jesse. "That is when it all began. The jacked-up feed prices, the crooked tax numbers, the loan that was impossible to pay back. It all kicked off within 6 months of your wife passing on. He just waited until you were grieving and had your hands full, and then he started turning the screws." Jesse stood over by the window, just watching the snow settle down quiet-like. Wade always did have a knack for sniffing out a man's weakness. That is not a knack. That is a system. He is not just doing this to you, Jesse. Take a look at these. Maggie held up a little stack of papers she had fished out from the very bottom of the box. These are receipts from your old neighbor, Tom Avery. You bought hay from him 2 years back. Look at the price he gave you. Tom's prices were always square, they sure were. But now look at this invoice from 6 months later. Tom sold his ranch and packed up for Oregon. And can you guess who bought his land? Wade Prescott did, for a price that was way below what it was worth. And here is the part that will curl your hair. Tom Avery's tax assessment just happened to double the year before he sold out. The exact same game as yours. Orrin Flagg inflated the value of his place. Tom could not afford the higher taxes, so Wade came in with a vulture's bid. Jesse turned away from the window. How many other ranchers has he done this to? From what I can piece together here, it is at least 4 in the last 6 years. He is buying up Silver Creek one ruined family at a time. Yay. And the reason no one has caught on to the pattern is because no one is looking at the whole picture. Each rancher is just worried about his own troubles. They do not realize their troubles are all connected. Until me. Jesse sat down at the table across from her. What are we going to do? We need the other ranchers. If I am right about this, every one of them has a piece of this puzzle. Their receipts, their tax records, their loan papers. On its own, each story just looks like a string of bad luck or poor decisions. But when you put them all together, they paint a picture of a conspiracy. But I have to see their paperwork to prove it. Most of those folks are long gone, moved on, or just scattered to the wind. Not all of them. Dorothy knows every single soul who has come through Silver Creek in the last 30 years. If there is anyone who can help us track down who is left, it is going to be her. The roads were still buried under 3 feet of snow. So Jesse hitched up the big draft horse to the sled, and they started the slow journey into town. Maggie brought her stack of evidence. Jesse brought his rifle, not because he was looking for a fight, but because Wade Prescott had eyes and ears all over. And a man who had spent 7 years stealing ranches would not be too pleased with someone poking around in his business. Dorothy Perkins listened to every word Maggie said as she laid out the papers on her counter. She did not cut in. She did not gasp. She just listened with the sharp focus of a woman who had made it through 55 years in a hard land by noticing the things other people were too busy to see. "I knew it," Dorothy said as soon as Maggie had finished. "I have known for years that something was not right, but I could never quite put my finger on it. Ranches going under, families pulling up stakes, and Wade Prescott getting fatter and fatter while everyone else around him just got poorer. But knowing a thing and proving it are 2 different horses. Can you help me find the people he did this to? Anyone still around here, or anyone who might have held on to their records?" "Sarah Avery, Tom's wife. She is staying with her sister up in Billings." They had to leave in a hurry, but Sarah is the kind of woman who saves everything. She will have every last scrap of paper Tom ever put his hands on. And then there is Hector Ruiz. He used to run cattle just south of town. Wade ran him off about 3 years ago, but Hector did not go too far. He is working as a hired hand over at the Miller Ranch about 20 miles east. And do not forget Martha Cannon Cade. No relation to your family, Jesse. She lost her place the same year Hannah passed. She is still right here in Silver Creek, working over at the boarding house. Can you get a message to them? I can do you one better. I can get them to come here. But Maggie, you need to understand something. Wade Prescott is not just a common cheat. He is a dangerous man. He has got Orrin Flagg in his back pocket, along with half the other officials in this county. On top of that, he has got money and lawyers and men who will do whatever he tells them to. If he gets wind of what you are up to before you are ready, he will not just try to stop you, he will ruin you. He can try, Maggie said flatly. I am serious, child. The last man who stood up to Wade Prescott was some newspaper fellow from Helena who came sniffing around about 3 years ago. He left town with 2 broken ribs and a real strong suggestion that the Montana air was bad for his health. Jesse's hand drifted down to his hip, right where his Colt usually sat. He had left it back at the ranch today. We will be careful. Careful is not going to be enough. You need to have the law on your side before you make a move. The sheriff is an honest man, but he is just one man with one deputy in a town where Wade Prescott signs half the paychecks. You need someone with real power. The United States Marshal's office, Maggie said. Both Dorothy and Jesse stared at her. If Wade Prescott has been filing fake documents with the county, that is not just stealing. That is fraud against the entire territorial government. The Marshal's office up in Helena has the authority here. You sure know a lot about the law for a seamstress, Dorothy said. And there was a note in her voice that sounded less like suspicion and more like respect. I know a lot about fraud, Maggie answered. I was married to a man who was a professional at it. I learned exactly how the system works by watching him bend it to his will. The only difference is, I plan on using what I know to tear Wade Prescott down instead of building him up. A slow smile spread across Dorothy's face. It was the kind of smile that tended to make powerful men real nervous. I do believe I like you, Margaret Calloway. Call me Maggie. And I like you too, Dorothy. Now, could you write a letter to the Marshal's office? My handwriting is decent, but your name carries a whole lot more weight in this territory than mine does. I will write it this very day, but it is going to take a while. Letters move slow in the winter, and marshals tend to move even slower. You could be waiting for weeks to hear anything back. Then we will use that time to make our case airtight. Jesse, I need to go over your loan papers one more time, line by line, word for word. If there are mistakes in his math, I want to find every last one. And I would like to speak with Martha Consincade today, if that is possible. Martha Consincade was a tall, bony woman of 45, with hands that were rough from a life of hard work, and eyes that had seen too much sorrow to ever expect much good. She listened to Maggie explain her theory in the little back room of the boarding house, her face giving nothing away. My husband died owing Wade Prescott $800, Martha said. Or at least that is what Wade's lawyer told me. But Henry swore up and down he had paid that debt in full. Said he had all the receipts to prove it. But when we went to look for them, they were just gone. Somebody had broken into our house while we were all at church and took every last financial paper we owned. When did this happen? It was the spring of 1883. Henry passed away that summer. His heart just gave out. Doc Shaw claimed it was from all the strain. I say Wade Prescott killed him just as sure as if he had put a gun to his head. He just did it with paper and ink instead of lead. Do you have anything left at all? Any kind of record? Martha looked down for a moment. Then she reached deep into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. Henry gave this to me the day before he died. He told me to keep it hidden away and not to tell a single soul. I have been carrying this with me for 4 years now, not having any idea what to do with it. Inside that envelope was a single receipt, written by hand, dated March of 1883, and signed by Wade Prescott himself. It was a receipt for payment in full of Henry Kincaid's debt, $800, paid and settled. Maggie's hands were shaking as she held it. Wade took your records to destroy any proof that the debt was paid, but your husband had already gotten a receipt from him. Henry was always a careful man that way. He never did trust Wade, not even when they were doing business together. He always made sure to get things in writing. Martha, this right here is proof that Wade Prescott collected on a debt that had already been paid off. That is fraud. When you put this together with what I found in Jesse's own records, it proves a pattern. Martha's eyes welled up with tears she had clearly been holding back for years. Can you truly stop him? Because I have been watching that man steal from this town for a decade and no one has ever been able to touch him. I can stop him, Maggie said. But I'm going to need your help. I need you to tell your story to the marshal when the time is right. Can you do that? For Henry, I would walk straight through fire. For the next 2 weeks, Maggie built her case with the steady hand of a master carpenter and the fury of a woman who knew exactly how it felt to be robbed of everything. Dorothy's letters brought Sarah Avery all the way down from Billings with a trunk full of Tom's old records. Hector Ruiz rode in from the Miller Ranch carrying his own stack of papers, his face hard with the anger of a man who had lost his home and his livelihood to a liar. Every single story was different in the small details, but they were identical in the pattern. Sky-high assessments, predatory loans, missing documents, and always in the middle of it all was Wade Prescott, pulling all the strings and collecting land like a spider collecting flies in its web. Maggie organized all of it into one single powerful story. She cross-referenced all the dates, the amounts, and the signatures. She found the very same handwriting on several forged papers. Handwriting that was not Wade's, but belonged to someone he paid. She calculated the total amount stolen from the ranching families of Silver Creek over 6 years and came to a number that was enough to make Dorothy plant herself in a chair. $14,000. Dorothy declared that he had swindled $14,000 from his neighbors, and that was just the amount she could prove. The true sum was likely a whole lot higher. Jesse, who'd been standing near the door without a word, finally spoke. We got a letter back from the marshal's office. Deputy Marshal James Colton is set to arrive in Silver Creek before January is over. He's been looking into Prescott's dealings up in Helena. It seems we are not the only folks who have picked up on his little scheme. How long does that buy us? Maggie asked. 2 weeks, maybe less, if this good weather holds. That is all I need. I just need one last thing. And what is that? Prescott's personal ledgers. Everything I have so far came from the people he wronged. It makes a strong case, but a slick lawyer could claim each incident was separate, just mistakes with no real plot behind it. But if I can get my hands on Prescott's private accounts, his actual books, I can show a clear trail of money coming in from every single rancher he has cheated. That is the final nail in his coffin. And just how do you aim to get Wade Prescott's private accounts? Jesse asked, his voice telling her he already knew the answer and was not happy about it. Orrin Flagg, Maggie said plainly. He has been Wade's inside man at the county office for years. He has also been pocketing a little extra from Wade on the side. I discovered it in your own tax papers. Flagg bumped up your assessment by $112, but only $80 of that went to Wade. Flagg held on to the rest for himself. If Wade ever discovered his own man was stealing right from under his nose, Flagg would do just about anything to keep him from finding out, Dorothy concluded. Even if it meant turning on Wade. Precisely. That is playing with fire, Jesse warned. All of this is. But Flagg is a coward. I have seen him around town. He drinks more than he should, talks louder than he ought to, and starts sweating through his shirt collar any time Wade's name is mentioned. He is scared to death. And men who are scared to death make bargains. Jesse just stared at Maggie for a good long while. I do not want you going anywhere near Orrin Flagg. Jesse, I am serious. Wade Prescott is one thing, but that man Flagg is a wild card. If he gets spooked, he will bolt. And if he bolts, he takes what he knows with him. That means we lose our only real shot. I have to be the one to talk to him before he senses what is coming. Before Wade senses what is coming. Then I am going with you. No. If you walk in there with me, Flag will know right away that something is not right. A woman buying some ribbon at the general store who just happens to strike up a conversation. Nobody would look twice at that. A rancher holding a grudge standing right behind her. Now that looks like a threat. Jesse absolutely hated the idea. Maggie saw it in the way he held himself. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw was set tight, and his hands kept balling into fists and then relaxing, like they were searching for something to grab onto. He was a man who fixed problems himself, with his own two hands and his own grit. Letting someone else walk into danger for him went against his very nature. "Trust me on this," Maggie said softly. "I have dealt with men more dangerous than Orrin Flagg." That's what had her worried. She found Flagg on a Tuesday afternoon down at the saloon, which was his usual spot for a Tuesday. He was drinking by himself, and that wasn't like him. He was sweating up a storm even though it was cold out, which was exactly like him. Maggie sat right down across from him, didn't even ask. Flagg looked up, all startled, his eyes hazy and full of suspicion. "Mr. Flagg, my name is Margaret Calloway. I work over at the Holbrook Ranch. I know who you are. You are Holbrook's mail-order woman. I am his bookkeeper, and I have been looking through his finances with a whole lot of interest, especially his tax assessments." Flagg's face turned the color of old, forgotten cheese. "I do not know what you are talking about. I surely think you do. I reckon you have been puffing up property values for Wade Prescott for the last 6 years. I reckon you have been taking a piece of every single one of those fake dollars. And I am willing to bet Wade Prescott does not know a thing about your little bonus. You can't prove a lick of that. I can prove every last bit of it. I have the assessment records, the real property values, and the difference between what you told Wade and what you really charged. The numbers do not lie, Mr. Flagg. You have been stealing from the man who signs your checks." Flagg's hand started shaking so bad he tipped over his whiskey glass. "What do you want?" "I want to see Wade Prescott's personal financial books. His real ledgers, the ones that show where every penny goes. I do not have anything like that. But you know exactly where they are." Flagg did not say a word. His eyes jumped to the door, then to the window, and back to the door again. "Mr. Flagg, there is a Deputy United States Marshal on his way to Silver Creek. He is coming here with one purpose, and that is to look into Wade Prescott's land deals. When he gets here, he is going to find a mighty detailed case built on the stories of every rancher Wade has cheated over the last 6 years. Your name shows up in that case quite a bit. I was just following his orders. That marshal is not going to care about that, but he might just care if you decided to help, if you handed over some proof that helped take Prescott down. Folks who cooperate usually get treated a lot better than the ones who do not." Flagg just stared at her. She could practically see the wheels turning behind his bloodshot eyes. The fear of Wade Prescott was fighting the fear of a prison cell. Saving his own hide was fighting against any loyalty he had. It was not even a fair fight. "He keeps a ledger," Flagg finally said, "in the safe at his ranch house. It is black leather with a gold clasp. Every deal he has ever made is written down in that book. Every payment, every bribe, every single dollar he squeezed out of every family he has ruined. How do I get my hands on it? You do not. That safe is tucked behind a locked door in his office, and Wade keeps that key on him day and night. You would have to just walk right into his house and take it, or I would need somebody to bring it to me." Flagg got real still. "You are asking me to go and steal from Wade Prescott. I am asking you to save your own skin. When that marshal shows up and opens that ledger, every name inside it is going to be in hot water. If you are the one who gave him the proof, you are a witness, not the one on trial. It is the only smart move you have left, Mr. Flagg. And I think you know it." Flagg wiped up what was left of his spilled whiskey from the table with his finger and licked it off. It was the move of a man fresh out of options, and men like that are either a great help or a great danger. Maggie watched him close, and she waited. "Wednesday nights," Flagg said. "Wade heads to the card game at the Silver Dollar. He is gone from 7 until midnight. His foreman always goes with him. The house is completely empty, And the key. He keeps a spare in his desk drawer, top one on the right, underneath a false bottom. Thank you, Mr. Flagg. Do not thank me. Just make sure my name stays off a prison roll. Maggie left the saloon and found Jesse waiting for her across the street, just leaning on the hitching post with his arms crossed and a look on his face that could sour milk. Well, he asked, Wednesday night we are getting that ledger. We? I need someone to stand watch for me while I go inside. You are planning to break into Wade Prescott's house. I am retrieving property that was stolen. There is a big difference. The law might not see it quite like that. The law has not seen a single thing Wade Prescott has done for 6 years. Sometimes justice just needs a little nudge. Jessie looked her square in the eye. She looked right back. The wind whipped between them, sharp and cold and smelling like snow was on the way. All right, he said. Wednesday night it is. Wednesday rolled in with a sky clear as glass, and a moon so bright it made the snow shine like silver. Jessie left the children with Rosa Delgado, who had come up from town to help out with Ellie's mending, and ended up staying on because Lucy asked her to, which was a little miracle all by itself. They rode out to the Prescott Ranch without a word. Jesse was carrying his Colt. Maggie was carrying nothing but her own grit and a leather satchel for the book. The house was dark as a pocket. The stable was empty except for 2 horses, which told them Wade and his foreman had surely gone to town. 10 minutes, Maggie said. If I am not out of there in 10 minutes, you ride on without me. Like hell I will. Jesse, if something goes wrong in there, your children need their father. Promise me. He did not make any promise. He just set his jaw and watched her walk toward the back door of Wade Prescott's house. A small woman in a dark dress moving across the moonlit snow like a shadow with a job to do. The door was unlocked. Folks in Silver Creek did not lock their doors, a trust that Wade Prescott had been taking advantage of for years. Maggie slipped through the kitchen and down the hallway. She found the office, found the desk, top right drawer, false bottom, key. The safe was hiding behind a painting. Maggie nearly laughed out loud. It was so predictable it almost hurt. She unlocked it with the key and found the ledger right where Flagg said it would be. Black leather, gold clasp, heavy with 7 years of dirty deeds. She was just reaching for it when she heard the front door creak open. Maggie froze solid. Footsteps coming down the hall. Heavy, sure steps, not Jesse's. Jesse moved as quiet as a barn cat. These footsteps belonged to a man who knew he owned the very ground he walked on. I was wondering when you would finally show up, Wade Prescott said from the doorway. Maggie turned around slow. Wade stood there in the office entrance, his coat still buttoned up, his hat still sitting on his head. Behind him, 2 men she had never seen before were blocking the hall. They were big fellas, armed, and looking at her the way a coyote looks at a rabbit in a trap. Orrin Flagg has been my man for 6 years, Wade said. Did you really believe he would not tell me everything the second you walked away from that table? Maggie's heart was pounding against her ribs like a drum, but when her voice came out, it was steady. I think you came back from your card game a little early, which tells me I scared you. And scared men make mistakes. Wade smiled. It was the coldest thing Maggie had ever laid eyes on. The only mistake made here was yours. You should have stayed back in Philadelphia, Mrs. Creed. That name hit her like a slap across the face. He knew. He knew who she was, where she'd come from, what she was running away from. Oh, yes, Wade said, seeing the shock on her face. I know all about you. Emmett Creed is a business partner of mine. He has been looking for you high and low. Seems there is a little matter of some outstanding warrants back east. Those warrants are based on forged papers, just like the ones you have been filing against Jesse Holbrook. Prove it. Wade stepped into the room. You are standing in my house, uninvited, with your hand on my safe. That is breaking and entering here in Montana. That is a hanging offense for the right kind of folks. And what kind of folks would that be? The kind with no family, no money, and nobody who would even notice they were gone. A click echoed from the hallway, the sound a pistol makes when you cock it, and there was no mistaking it. And then another click came from the window behind Wade. A different gun, a voice she knew well. That lady has got family. Jesse Holbrook said from the darkness outside. "She has got me, and if any man in this room lays a hand on her, I will put a bullet through him before he can draw his next breath." Wade Prescott turned slow as molasses toward the window. Jesse stood there in the moonlight, his Colt held steady, and his eyes as cold as a Montana winter. "You are making a mistake, Holbrook. It would not be my first. Maggie, get the ledger and walk on out. I have got you covered." Maggie snatched the black leather book from the safe, held it tight to her chest, and walked toward the door. Wade's men shuffled on their feet, looking to their boss to see what to do. "Let her go," Wade said. His voice was calm, but Maggie could see the rage burning deep in his eyes. "This is not over." "No," Maggie said, stopping right in the doorway. She held up the ledger. "It is just getting started." She walked out into the night, into the cold, and right into Jesse's arms. He caught her with one hand, kept the gun raised with the other, and they backed away from that house together, one careful step at a time, until they got to the horses. They rode hard through the moonlit snow, the ledger safe in Maggie's satchel, and Jesse's Colt still in his hand. Neither one of them said a word until they were a good 3 miles away from Prescott's land. "He knew," Maggie said. "He knew about Emmett. He knew about the warrants." "We will handle it," Jesse said. "If Emmett has reached this far west, we will handle him. All of it. But first things first, we get that ledger into Dorothy's safe, and then we wait for the marshal. And if the marshal does not get here in time—" Jesse holstered his gun and looked over at her. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp lines and shadows, and his eyes held a kind of certainty Maggie had never seen in him before. "Then we will fight with what we have got. You and me. Together." Maggie clutched the ledger a little tighter. Inside that book was every crime Wade Prescott had ever committed, every family he had torn apart, every dollar he had ever stolen. It felt heavy in her hands, heavy with the suffering of other people, but it also felt light, full of the promise of justice. And justice, Maggie had learned, I learned a long time ago, was always worth the risk. Deputy Marshal James Colton rode into Silver Creek on a Tuesday morning, just 3 days after Maggie and Jesse had retrieved the ledger from Wade Prescott's safe. He was alone, on horseback, wearing a long coat with a dusting of snow from the trail and a badge that shined in the winter sun. He looked younger than Maggie had pictured, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the quiet disposition of a man who did more listening than talking. Dorothy led him to the back room of her store, where Maggie had every bit of proof she had collected laid out on the table. The ledger was sitting right in the middle, looking like the black heart of some foul creature that had finally been cut open for the world to see. "You put all this together?" Colton asked as he flipped through Maggie's neatly organized files, the cross-references, the math, the whole timeline. "I did it in 3 weeks. Numbers do not take much time when they are telling the truth. It is the lies that take a while to build." Colton gave her a look that was somewhere between deep respect and outright disbelief. "Mrs. Calloway, I have been investigating Wade Prescott for 8 months. My office has a file on him 2 inches thick. And in 3 weeks, with nothing but a box of receipts and a stolen book, you have built a tighter case than we have with all the resources of the territorial government. I had a powerful reason. Wade Prescott is trying to take my family's home." The words came out before she even thought about them. My family. They just hung there in the quiet room, and Maggie could feel the weight of them settle deep in her bones. Jesse, who was standing over by the door, heard them plain as day. She did not dare look at him, but she could feel his gaze on her, as warm and steady as a hand on her shoulder. "The ledger is what holds it all together," Maggie went on. "Every single transaction is written in Wade's own handwriting. Every payment to Orrin Flagg, every bribe to a county man, every last dollar he squeezed out of the families he cheated. It is all in there. Names, dates, amounts, and all the fake documents. Page 47. He kept copies of every fake assessment, every crooked loan paper. He was careful about his crimes, Marshal. He recorded them with the same attention to detail an honest man would give his lawful business." Colton shut the ledger and leaned back in his chair. Well, here is my predicament. You took this book from his house without his permission. A defense lawyer will claim it cannot be used in court. I took stolen property from a thief. Every dollar in that book was taken by means of fraud. The book itself is proof of an ongoing criminal operation. And I have got witnesses. Martha Kincaid has a receipt that proves Wade collected on a debt that she had already paid off. Sarah Avery has papers showing her husband's tax assessment was jacked up on purpose. Hector Ruiz is ready to testify that Wade's men threatened him to make him sell his land for less than it was worth. I will need to have a word with every one of them. They are ready. They have been ready for years. They just needed somebody to finally listen. Colton gave a slow nod. I will need 2 days to confirm the most important evidence and get the arrest warrants drawn up. Can y'all keep a lid on this until then? We can sure try, Jesse said from his spot by the door. But Wade knows we have his ledger. He is not just going to sit around and wait. Then do not give him a chance to make a move. Y'all stick together, stay out in public, and do not go anywhere by yourselves. I will send a wire to Helena for more deputies. This is liable to get real loud before it gets quiet again. Jesse drove Maggie back toward the ranch, and they did not say a word. The children were staying with Rosa, who had moved in for a bit after Ellie got sick and had not shown any sign of leaving. Maggie was thankful to have her there. Rosa was a steady, warm presence who never got rattled, and she made tamales that even Lucy had to admit were better than her own. They were about a mile from the ranch when Jesse pulled the wagon to a halt. "What is the matter?" Maggie asked. "Nothing is the matter. I just have to say something before we get back home. Before the children are all around and there is no peace to be found." Maggie waited. "You said my family back there at Dorothy's store. You called us your family. I know. Were you just saying that, or did you mean it?" Jesse Holbrook. "I walked 12 miles in a blizzard to get to this town. I have spent the last 3 weeks going up against a man who could ruin me without a second thought. I broke into a man's house. I stole his private ledger, and I stood my ground against 2 men with guns. And I did every bit of it for a man and 3 children I have not even known for a full month. What do you think?" Jesse just looked at her. The winter sun was low in the sky, casting a golden light behind her, and the last of the bruise on her cheek had finally disappeared completely. Her green eyes were lit with a fire that was not from anger, but from the fierce, stubborn, and wonderful thing that was growing there between them. "I think I would like to marry you," he said. "Not for the homestead, and not for the children, though Lord knows they need you. Not for a single practical reason. I want to marry you because you are the most courageous person I have ever known, and because when you walk into a room, I feel like I can finally breathe again, and because I have not felt that way since Hannah, and I honestly thought I never would again." Maggie's eyes started to sting. "You are asking me to marry you on the side of a frozen road in a wagon." "I am. We have known each other for 23 days. I am aware. I am being investigated for crimes I did not commit. There is a man back in Philadelphia who wants to see me in jail, and another one right here in Silver Creek who wants to see me ruined. I know all of that." "No. And you still want to marry me?" "More than I have wanted anything in a very long time." Maggie looked at this man with his face weathered by the wind and his hands rough from work, and his dark, stormy eyes that held more tenderness than he probably realized. She thought of Virgil, who had courted her with bouquets and sweet talk, and then spent 6 years tearing her down piece by piece. She thought of Emmett, who had taken everything from her and had the nerve to call it justice. She thought of every man who had ever made her feel small or afraid, or like she was not worth a thing. Jesse Holbrook had never, not for one single moment, made her feel any of that. He had given her work and a roof over her head and honesty. He had trusted her with his children and his secrets and his sorrow. He had stood right outside Wade Prescott's window with a gun and said, "The ladies have got family." "Yes," she said, "but not until this is all over. Not until Wade Prescott is in chains and your ranch is safe and my name is cleared. I will not start our marriage with a dark cloud hanging over it." "Fair enough. But when it is done, when it is all done, Jesse Holbrook, I will marry you so fast this town will not know what hit it." Jesse smiled. It was the kind of smile that changed a man's whole face, that took years of grief and weariness and turned them into something that looked an awful lot like joy. He snapped the reins and the wagon jolted forward. And Maggie sat right there beside him, with her heart pounding and her eyes getting wet, and a feeling in her chest that she remembered from a long, long time ago. From before Virgil, from before everything went wrong. It felt like coming home. They had one day of peace. One single day of the children laughing and Rosa cooking and Jesse fixing the barn door while Maggie organized the last of the evidence for Marshall Colton. One day of Ellie sitting on Maggie's lap while Maggie sewed, the child's small hands resting on hers, watching the needle glide through the fabric with a quiet wonder. One day of Lucy helping with supper without even being asked, and Caleb reading out loud from his almanac, stumbling over the big words but refusing any help. Then Wade Prescott came. He rode up to the ranch at high noon the very next day with 6 men riding behind him. Jesse saw them coming from the barn and walked to the porch with his rifle. Maggie came out and stood right beside him. Behind them, through the kitchen window, she could see Rosa gathering up the children. "Holbrook," Wade called out from his horse. He did not get down. He sat on that horse with the easy arrogance of a man who believes he owns everything he can see. "I have come to settle this like gentlemen. You brought 6 armed men to a family ranch. That is not how gentlemen act. Call it insurance. I am a careful man. Now here is what is going to happen. You are going to give me back my property, the ledger, and then your bookkeeper is going to get on the next stagecoach headed east back to Philadelphia, where certain people are mighty eager to see her. The ledger is evidence of your crimes, and Maggie is not going anywhere. Then I will take them both by force. I have the legal right to take back stolen property, and I have a telegraph from Emmett Creed authorizing me to detain his sister-in-law as a fugitive." "You do not have any legal right to anything," Maggie said. "You have money and threats and hired guns. That is not law. That is just being a bully with a bigger budget." Wade's eyes narrowed. "You are a sharp woman, Mrs. Creed. Too sharp for your own good. Your husband was the same way. Clever right up until the very moment his cleverness got him killed. My husband took his own life. With whiskey and plain old foolishness. Do not put yourself in his league, Mr. Prescott. You are not nearly as slick." One of Wade's men let out a chuckle, but it died in his throat when Wade shot him a look that could have flash-froze a branding iron. "This is your last chance, Holbrook. Give me the ledger and the woman, or I am going to burn this ranch to the ground. I will do it just like I torched Tom Avery's barn and Martha Consincade's hayshed, and every other thing that belonged to folks who got in my way." Jesse lifted his rifle. "Get off my land. You reckon one man with a rifle is fixing to stop me? He will not have to." The voice drifted up from the road behind Wade's men. Marshall Colton appeared, riding with 4 deputies beside him. They were all armed, and all of them wore the badge of the United States Marshal Service. Behind them, on foot, came Sheriff Puete and his deputy, along with Dorothy Perkins, Martha Consincade, and Hector Ruiz. And right behind them, walking with the quiet grit of people who had been pushed too far for too long, came a dozen more folks from Silver Creek. There were shopkeepers, ranchers, and hard-working men and women, all people Wade Prescott had cheated, bullied, and brushed aside. They did not carry any weapons, but they brought something far more dangerous. They brought the truth. "Wade Prescott," Colton called out, his voice ringing sharp and clear in the cold air. "I have warrants for your arrest. The charges are fraud, forgery, theft, intimidation, and conspiring to steal the lawful property of good citizens. I also have warrants for Orrin Flagg and 3 other men named in your personal ledger. You can come along quietly, or you can make this a whole lot harder. It is your call." Wade looked over at the deputies. He looked at the townspeople. He looked at Jesse's rifle and Maggie's unwavering gaze, and at the faces of every person he had robbed and left in ruin. They all stared right back at him, a cold satisfaction in their eyes. Justice was late to the party, but it had finally arrived. This is a joke, Wade said. My lawyers will have me out of here by sundown. Your lawyers are mentioned in that ledger too, Maggie said. Page 63. They might be a little busy with their own troubles. Something on Wade Prescott's face just broke. It was not exactly fear, but more like the sudden gut-punch realization that the world he had built, his whole empire of lies and stolen land and broken families, was crumbling down around him, and there was not a thing his money or his men or his connections could do to stop it. Get down from your horse, Mr. Prescott, Colton said. Do not make me ask you again. Wade swung down off his horse. His men, seeing the deputies' guns and the crowd behind them, made the smart choice to stay perfectly still. Colton cuffed Wade's hands behind his back while his deputies took the guns from his men. You will regret this, Wade spat at Maggie as Colton led him past. All of you will regret this. The only thing I regret, Maggie shot back, is that it took us this long. She watched them lead him down the road toward town. His expensive coat dragged in the snow. His hat fell off and landed in the dirt, and nobody even bothered to pick it up. Behind her, she heard Lucy's voice from the doorway. Is it over? Maggie turned around. All three children were standing on the porch. Lucy had her arms wrapped around Ellie. Caleb was pressed tight against his sister's side. And then there was Ellie. Small, quiet Ellie looking up at Maggie with those big brown eyes that saw everything but said so little. It is over, Maggie said. Ellie took a step forward, then one more. She crossed the porch, walked down the steps, and stopped right in front of Maggie. She raised her arms just like any child does when they want to be held. Maggie lifted her right up. Ellie wrapped her little arms around Maggie's neck and her legs around Maggie's waist, holding on like she was never going to let go. Stay, Ellie whispered. It was just that one word, but she said it loud enough for everybody to hear. Maggie buried her face in Ellie's hair and closed her eyes. She held that child, that hurt, brave, and unbreakable little girl, and she felt the very last wall around her own heart just tumble down. I am staying, she whispered back. I promise I am staying. Jesse put his arm around both of them. Lucy came down the steps and leaned against her father's side. Caleb squeezed in wherever he could find a spot, and Rosa stood in the doorway with tears on her cheeks, just watching this family stitch itself back together from a bunch of broken pieces, the same way Maggie's mother had taught her to make something beautiful out of things other people had thrown away. They were married 3 weeks later in the little church at the edge of Silver Creek. Pastor Nathaniel Webb conducted the ceremony. Dorothy Perkins cried through the whole thing. Doc Shaw stood up with Jesse. He was sober for the occasion, with steady hands and clear eyes. Rosa held Ellie on her hip. Caleb was the ring-bearer and only dropped the ring one time. Martha Consincade sat in the front row and cried for Henry, who should have been alive to see that day, and Lucy. Lucy, who had fought so hard against this very moment, who had guarded her sadness like a fortress and pushed back against Maggie with all her might, stood right beside Maggie at the altar and held her hand. Are you sure? Lucy had asked that morning. She was standing in Maggie's room while Maggie put on the cream-colored gown Dorothy had given her. You really want to stay here with us? It is not easy, you know. Pa snores. Caleb breaks things. Ellie still does not talk much. And I am difficult. You are not difficult, Lucy. You are strong. There is a difference. Ma was strong. She still died. I know. And I cannot promise you that I will not die someday too. But I can promise that for every single day I am here, I will love you and your sister and your brother with everything I have. And I can promise that I will never, ever choose to leave. Is that enough? Lucy just looked at her for a long moment. This was a girl who had to be a mother at 7 and had her heart hardened by the time she was 11. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around Maggie and said very quietly, It is enough. The trial took place in March. Wade Prescott, Orrin Flagg, and 4 other men were charged with a total of 47 counts of fraud, forgery, and outright thieving. The mountain of proof Maggie brought against him filled up 3 whole crates. For 2 full days she stood up there and told her story, laying it all out for the jury, every last number, every faked document, every stolen dollar. She did it with a surgeon's steady hand and the fire of a woman who knew what it was to have everything snatched away by a man who figured he was above the law. Prescott's high-dollar lawyers did their best to tear her down. They threw those old warrants from Philadelphia in her face, along with the accusations from EMTT Creed. Maggie met every question with that same quiet calm she brought to everything. Yes, sir, my late husband was a criminal. No, I was not his partner in it. Yes, his brother pressed charges against me. No, there is not a lick of truth to those charges. And if this court wants to put what EMTT Creed has on me next to what I have got on Wade Prescott, well, I would welcome that right now. One of them is built on the tall tales of a grieving brother. The other is built on 7 years of pure, documented stealing. That jury was out for only 4 hours. Wade Prescott was found guilty on 39 of 47 counts. He got 12 years in the territorial prison. Orrin Flagg got 5. The others got less, and every single acre of land Wade had stolen was ordered back to the folks who owned it or their kin. Martha Concade got her ranch back. She just stood right there in the courtroom when they read the verdict, clutching Henry's receipt in her hand, and the tears just came. Those warrants from Philadelphia got tossed out 6 weeks. Later, after Marshal Colulton's office got in touch with the law back east and showed them proof that EMTT Creed's claims were all smoke, EMTT himself ended up charged with filing false reports and harassment. Maggie never laid eyes on him again. Springtime eased into Silver Creek like it always did, taking its sweet time, like the land just hated to let go of the cold. The snow melted off in patches, showing the brown grass and mud underneath, and the first stubborn green shoots pushing their way up. The cattle that made it through the winter headed out to pasture, skinny but still kicking. The birds came back. The creek swelled up high with melted snow. Over at the Holbrook Ranch, Maggie got to work planting her garden by the kitchen door. She started with herbs, the very same kinds her grandmother used to grow, the ones that had saved little Ellie's life. Then came the vegetables, and after that, flowers, all because Lucy asked for them, and Maggie would have lasted the moon for that little girl if she could have. Jesse got to rebuilding the piece of fence that the snow had taken down. Caleb helped him out, holding nails and fetching tools, chattering on about anything and everything. Ellie trailed after Maggie inside the house, quiet as a little shadow. Not always talking, but always there, always near. She had started to speak a little more. A few words one day, a whole sentence the next. Each one felt like a small miracle that Maggie accepted with the gentle care of someone who knew that trust, once it has been shattered, has to be pieced back together, one soft word at a time. One warm April evening, after the kids were tucked in and the house was still, Maggie sat out on the porch with Jesse, and they just watched the sun dip down below their land. Their land. That word still felt brand new, almost dangerous, like something that could be snatched away at any moment. "You are thinking awful loud over there," Jesse said. "I am just thinking how fragile all this is. One hard winter, one bad sickness, one man holding a grudge, and it could all just disappear." "It could," he said, "but it is not gone. It is right here. Doesn't that scare you?" "Scares me to death every single day. But I would a whole lot rather be scared with you than feel safe by myself." Maggie rested her head against his shoulder. He felt warm and solid and real, and his arm around her was the most dependable thing she had ever known. "I was thinking about something Ellie said today," Maggie told him. "She is talking more and more." "What did she say?" "She asked if I was her mama now, and I told her that was up to her to decide. And she thought on it for the longest time, you know how she does. Then she just said, 'You are my Maggie. That is better.'" Jesse's arm pulled her in a little tighter. "She is right, you know. That is better." They sat there together while the sky bled from gold to purple, then to the deep, dark blue of a Montana night. The first stars popped out, sharp and bright in the cold, clear air. From the barn, a horse nickered. From inside the house, one of the children shifted in their sleep and then grew still. Maggie thought about the woman she had been just 4 months ago, beaten down and broken to pieces. Climbing down from a stagecoach with 11 cents to her name and a dead man's reputation and nowhere else to go. That woman had not expected a single thing from this life other than to see the next sunrise. She would not have dared to even dream of kindness or safety or love. She had come to Montana searching for a place to hide away, and instead she had found a place she belonged. She had found a man who would stand in a blizzard with a gun in his hand just to keep her safe. Children who had cracked her heart wide open and filled it with a feeling more fierce and tender than anything she had ever known. A town full of folks who circled the wagons for their own and fought like hell against the men who tried to tear them down. In the very last place on earth she would have looked, she found what she had been searching for her whole life. It was not a husband or a house or even safety. It was purpose. It was knowing that her mind, her courage, and her plain old stubborn refusal to give up could actually make a difference. That she could protect the people she loved. That she was not the broken, worthless thing Virgil Creed and his brother always told her she was. She was Maggie Holbrook now. And she was right where she was always meant to be. "Jesse," she said. "Hmm? Thank you for not being there to meet me at the stagecoach that day." He let out a low, warm laugh that she felt clear through his chest. "You are thanking me for leaving you high and dry in a blizzard. I am thanking you for letting me walk through it. If you had been standing there with a warm coat and a kind word, I would have leaned on you right from the get-go. Instead, I had to find my own 2 feet first. I had to prove to myself that I could do it, and that made everything that came after mean so much more." Jessie kissed the top of her head. "You would have been just fine either way. You are the strongest person I've ever known." "I was not always," she said. "But I am now." The night settled in around them, big and cold and just scattered with stars. Inside the house, their children were sound asleep. In the barn, the animals breathed low and shifted in the dark. The land rolled out in all directions, frozen and just waiting for spring to finish the job it started. And on the porch of a ranch they had almost lost, in a town that had nearly been shattered, 2 souls who had come close to giving up on it all just sat together in the quiet dark. They held on to each other and to the life they had built from scratch, with nothing but courage, a head for numbers, and the stubborn notion that it is never too late to start over. Maggie closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of Jessie's heart, the whisper of the wind, and the deep quiet of the snow. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was not an ending at all. It was just the beginning. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.